Welcome to FinTechs from Laura and Anthony. Today we're looking at some, pretty significant shifts happening in American finances that are definitely raising eyebrows. We've seen this notable climb in the number of people exploring bankruptcy options. It's reaching levels we actually haven't observed since, early 2020? It's about understanding why this is happening now.
Absolutely. And it's a concerning trend. You're right. It's not happening in a vacuum. We're really seeing this convergence of, record high consumer debt, significantly higher interest rates, and just persistent inflation. It's really putting the squeeze on household budgets pretty much everywhere.
And the pandemic support ending is part of that picture, too.
Oh, definitely. Compounding all this is the fact that, many of those financial supports that were, put in place during the pandemic, they've now ended.
So let's talk about that jump in bankruptcy inquiries. Reports are saying, 16 to 18% year over year?
Yeah.
How does that compare to the pandemic period itself? Because things were different then.
Well, they were very different. During the height of the pandemic, bankruptcy filings were unusually low, artificially low, you could say. All those stimulus measures, the forbearance programs, they essentially created this temporary floor.
A safety net, almost.
Exactly. So now that those have receded, the underlying financial vulnerabilities, maybe things that were masked for a while, they're just becoming much more visible. It's like pulling back a curtain.
Right. And it's not just individuals feeling this pinch, is it? I saw the numbers around business bankruptcies looked even more, stark.
That's right, yeah. The increase there is even more pronounced. Commercial Chapter 11 filings, that's what larger businesses often use to reorganize that. They saw this dramatic surge, around 72%.
72%, wow.
Yeah. And what's really noteworthy is that filings involving businesses with assets over $50 million, I mean, at times those nearly tripled. It just underscores how those same economic headwinds, high interest rates, tighter lending standards, big debt burdens, inflation are hitting businesses too, even the larger ones.
Okay, but it's worth remembering you mentioned overall rates are still below pre-pandemic.
That's an important point, yes. Overall, filing rates are still below where they were before COVID hit. We're seeing a sharp increase, but not necessarily record levels yet compared to, say, 2019.
Got it. So the unwinding of that pandemic support is clearly a big factor. But these credit card interest rates, they seem historically high. We're talking averages over 20% this year.
Mm-hmm. Over 20% on average. It's quite staggering.
That must just be adding fuel to the fire, especially when people are already dealing with higher costs for, everything.
Without a doubt. Think about it. Inflation drives up the cost of groceries, gas, rent, everything. Then you layer on credit card interest, hitting these highs over 20%. It just creates this incredibly challenging situation for consumers trying to manage debt, let alone avoid taking on more.
And the average household balance is pretty significant, isn't it?
It is. Around $6,300, according to recent figures. And the amount people are paying just in interest each month, that's climbed substantially. It's about $152 a month just on interest for that average balance.
Just interest.
Yeah.
Wow. And that hits lower-income households hardest, I imagine?
It does, yes. They often have fewer options for lower-cost credit, so they're disproportionately affected by these high APRs.
It's almost surprising how many people might not even realize how much these rates have jumped. I saw a statistic, something like nearly half of Americans don't realize their credit card APRs have climbed by over 5 percentage points because of the Fed's rate hikes.
It's true. And that lack of awareness is a real problem.
Because if you don't know.
Exactly. If people aren't aware of the higher cost of borrowing, they might not adjust their spending or, their debt repayment strategies. It's interesting when you ask people what's making their credit card debt worse since 2022, what do they blame?
Let me guess. Inflation. High interest rates.
You got it. About a third blame inflation and another third point directly to those high interest rates. So people feel it even if they don't track the exact APR change.
Okay, so this isn't just hitting lower income folks. The data suggests middle-income households are feeling a lot of pressure too.
That's a really critical point. We often think of financial stress concentrated at the lower end, but recent data suggests something like 70% of all Americans are considered financially unhealthy, and that includes a huge chunk of the middle class.
70%? That's massive. What's driving that for the middle class specifically?
Well, it seems to be a combination of factors. Things like family size, which tends to be larger in that bracket, significant debt loads, think mortgages, car loans, and also varying levels of financial literacy play a role. Many middle-income families might have decent assets, like home equity, but they also carry substantial debt, which makes them vulnerable.
And I've heard this term, the two-income trap. That seems really relevant here for middle-income families. Can you explain that a bit?
Certainly. So over the last few decades, achieving what we think of as a middle-class lifestyle, house in a good school district, maybe a couple of cars, vacations, it's increasingly required two incomes.
Right, it's almost the standard now.
It is. But while that might seem more secure on the surface, it can actually increase a family's financial risk. Think about it. If one of those income streams gets disrupted, maybe a job loss or a medical issue, the family doesn't have that buffer of a non-working spouse potentially entering the workforce. Both earners are already tapped.
So there's less of a safety net if something goes wrong.
Precisely. It makes them more vulnerable to financial distress if one income disappears, even temporarily.
It really paints a picture of how tight things are for many. And that stat about a $400 emergency expense, that 1/3 of middle-class families couldn't cover it despite steady jobs, that really drives the point home.
It does. It shows how little cushion many people have. A lot of middle-class families are stretched thin. They might be paying, over 15% interest on credit cards and allocating maybe over 30% of their monthly disposable income just to debt payment.
30% just to debt, leaving very little room for the unexpected.
Very little. So an unexpected car repair, a medical bill, it can easily force them into taking on more high-cost debt, just perpetuating the cycle.
Okay, so we've laid out a pretty challenging landscape here. Given all these pressures, the debt, the rates, the inflation, the middle class, what are some concrete, actionable steps people can take now to try and avoid getting into serious trouble, maybe even avoiding bankruptcy?
Right, that's the crucial question.
Yeah.
Based on everything we're seeing, several key strategies really stand out. First, and maybe most importantly, be keenly aware of your current interest rates, especially on credit cards. Understand exactly how those recent rate hikes are hitting your monthly payments. Don't ignore those statements.
Know your numbers.
Know your numbers. Second, actively work to reduce that high-interest debt. Look at options. Maybe a balance transfer card with a 0% introductory offer could work if you can pay it off in time. Or perhaps a debt consolidation loan makes sense for your situation. Explore those avenues.
Okay, tackle the expensive debt first. Makes sense.
Third, build an emergency fund. Even a small one makes a difference. Aim for $500, then $1,000. Having any cushion helps you avoid reaching for a credit card when an unexpected expense pops up.
That buffer we were talking about.
Exactly. Fourth, take a hard, honest look at your debt-to-income ratio. Where is your money going? Identify areas where spending can realistically be adjusted, even slightly, to free up cash to pay down debt faster.
Budgeting, basically, but with a focus on debt reduction.
And fifth, work on improving financial literacy. Understand how compound interest works against you with debt. Learn about budgeting strategies, debt management techniques. Knowledge really is power here.
And for those middle-income, dual-income families you mentioned?
Yeah, for them, it's also wise to specifically evaluate the risks associated with relying heavily on both incomes. Talk about contingency plans. What happens if one income is reduced or lost? Thinking about it before it happens is key.
That's incredibly valuable advice. It really highlights how understanding these pressures and, more importantly, taking proactive steps is just essential right now.
Absolutely. It's clear many Americans are facing significant financial headwinds, but knowledge and proactive management are definitely the keys to navigating them successfully.
Well said. It's about being informed and taking control where you can. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.